U.S. officials in the Biden administration are worried that the Israel-Palestine conflict is going to turn into a much larger war. And the truth is, they should be. In fact, just this week, tensions between the U.S. and Iran have officially reached an all-time high after Iranian proxies attacked multiple U.S. bases within Syria and Iraq, hurting 20 plus and actually killing a U.S. contractor. The U.S. quickly responded by dropping 30 bombs on Iranian targets in that same region and making a statement that they will not allow for further Iranian attacks and will not back down from an all-out war. And how did Iran respond? Well, not even 8 hours later, 2 more suicide drones attacked another U.S. base, luckily this time with no injuries or casualties to U.S. personnel. So what is next for the U.S. is unclear, but these are an example of one thing. The Biden administration is right. This can quickly spiral out of control. From missile strikes from Yemen, killing in the West Bank, attacks on U.S. troops in Syria, and this is all before Israel has even began to launch the official ground invasion of Gaza, this situation is quickly reaching a boiling point. So let's take a look at what might kickstart it all, with the last one being the most dangerous and the most likely. American troops in a variety of locations across Iraq and Syria have already come under attack from suicide drones and rockets more than a dozen times in just the past week. Officials worry that these small-scale assaults, which the Pentagon blamed on Iranian-backed militant groups, could continue and even worsen in the coming days. There is concern that the attacks could expand beyond Iraq and Syria, which host 2,500 and 900 American troops, respectively. To the thousands of other U.S. personnel stationed across the region, from Bahrain to United Arab Emirates, there is a lot of danger. Even commercial vessels in the Persian Gulf could come under increased threat, according to different U.S. officials. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has directed additional forces to the region in response to these attacks in Iraq and Syria. This includes redirecting an aircraft carrier strike group en route to the Eastern Mediterranean to its Middle East command on Saturday. He also deployed additional air defense capabilities, including Patriot battalions and a terminal high-altitude area defense system to locations all across Iraq and Syria. This is in addition to another carrier strike group currently operating in the Eastern Mediterranean and thousands of forces on 24-hour prepare-to-deploy orders in case they are needed. In general, the increasing conflict in both of these regions could force the US's hand to take a more hardline approach against Iran and actually launch a full military operation against them. Israel's northern border with Lebanon is already the scene of a seemingly intensifying tit-for-tat strike between the Israeli military and Hezbollah, another Iranian-backed militant group. Israel has been evacuating villages near the border amid different rocket launches and concerns about militant incursions. Over the weekend and on Monday, Israeli Defense Forces reported using aerial drones and other means to hit multiple targets in Lebanon. This included militant cells suspected of trying to launch anti-tank missiles, as well as Hezbollah compounds and observation posts. Such skirmishes are worrying but not unprecedented. They can still be prevented from further escalation. Hezbollah faces its own domestic pressures, and Lebanon is already economically a failed state. They don't need a kind of death and destruction happening in Gaza to happen to them. U.S. officials have also leaned on Lebanese leaders to make this clear to Hezbollah, which also yields significant political influence in Lebanon. Like Hamas, the United States considers Hezbollah a terrorist group and generally avoids direct interactions with it. In recent calls with Lebanon's Prime Minister, Secretary of State Antony Blinken reiterated the importance of respecting the interests of the Lebanese people, who would be affected by Lebanon being drawn into the conflict instigated by Hamas. However, of course, the Lebanese government doesn't have full control over Hezbollah. And being an Iranian proxy, there's a very real possibility that they may act regardless of Lebanon's protest. I hope you're beginning to see a pattern here. The West Bank. Dozens of Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank since Hamas's attack on Israel. Many are suspected to have died at the hands of Israeli settlers who reside in the territory and may be taking advantage of the moment to sow fear in Palestinian communities and try to take their land. The Israeli military has also staged raids and carried out at least one airstrike in the West Bank aimed at a mosque Israeli officials said that Hamas was using as a base to plan attacks. Now, just to note, the justification of Israeli citizens being in these disputed territories is completely dependent on your view of this conflict. This video does not aim to answer this question, and it's simply informing how the West Bank could be a focal point for a greater conflict. And US officials are worried that this just might be the case. Tensions already were unusually high in the West Bank prior to the Hamas attack, much of it due to Palestinian frustrations over Israeli settlements where residents appear more willing to act violently. Gaza, which is home to 2.2 million Palestinians, the vast majority of them civilians, has long been run by Hamas. Israeli airstrikes on October 7th have killed thousands of Palestinians there. Seeing this has more or less radicalized a lot of Palestinians in the West Bank, and the actions on October 7th has of course radicalized many of the Israelis there too. For a while, the West Bank has been a strange middle ground of settlements and communities with a mixture of both peoples. However, with increasing violence between them, it is very likely to set off a chain reaction similar to the intensity that we are seeing in Gaza. The problem is, this will only increase the international outcry and support for one side or another, and that could lead to some nations jumping in to help the side that they're backing. There's a history here that goes beyond the fact that the US is allied with and supporting Israel in its war on Hamas. Iran and the US have been on the brink of open conflict since early 2020, when the US assassinated the notorious commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, Qasem Soleimani, the man widely believed responsible for enabling attacks against American troops throughout the region. Iran has a long memory, and earlier this year, it renewed its call for revenge. For months, Tehran apparently has been planning a more aggressive strategy aimed at US troops in the region. Just last February, Reuters reported that Iran used earthquake relief flights to Syria as a cover for secret weapon shipments, and the Washington Post reported that documents leaked as part of the Discord trove revealed plans by the ROGC to equip and train militants with devastating advanced IEDs. All of this may be a part of an effort coordinated among Russia, Iran, and Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad to expel the 900 US troops in Syria who are there to counter the Islamic State. That means, at the very least, that Iran is well positioned to heighten already roiling tensions in the Middle East after spending decades building a network of proxies and terror cells in Lebanon, Gaza, Iraq, Yemen, and elsewhere to act as a forward line of defense for a clerical regime that sees itself as surrounded by external threats. But there's also a deeper question of what exactly Iran did to bring about the crisis in the first place with the October 7th attacks, and what that says about where it goes from here. In Gaza, Iran has helped transform and expand the capabilities of Hamas and its smaller cousin, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, also involved in recent attacks on Israel, since 1987. Tehran has supplied a massive array of rockets, missiles, and other weapons, and also runs a sophisticated smuggling operation moving weapons from Iran to places like Yemen, Sudan, Egypt, and of course, Gaza. In addition, Iran has provided Hamas up to $100 million a year. Iran is reportedly fearful of a harsh response if it crosses Israel's red lines. Meanwhile, Hezbollah's probing attacks in Israel's north over the past 2 weeks may be intended as a sign of solidarity with Hamas and to keep Israel distracted from Gaza. And while the Iranian-allied Houthis in Yemen have fired shots at Israel in recent days, they haven't yet posed a serious threat to the Jewish state. Still, Iran and its allies have their own red lines too. Iranian-backed forces in Iraq and the Houthis in Yemen have both threatened American targets if the US intervenes. Iran has also warned against Israeli strikes on Iranian soil, and Hezbollah has hinted that any attempt by Israel to eliminate Hamas would be met with a major response. The situation could tip in a number of directions, depending on the smallest actions, and even the domestic considerations of the parties. For example, the alleged beating-induced coma of an Iranian 16-year-old for refusing to comply with Islamic dress laws earlier this month recalls the dramatic nationwide demonstrations against the morality police last year that authorities were hard-pressed to put down. If a distraction is needed, could Iran's clerical leaders look to a dramatic foreign crisis? Miscalculations, whether by Iran, Israel, Hezbollah, or even the US, could rapidly lead to a multi-front regional war, with casualties easily numbering in the tens of thousands. None of the major parties involved appear to have a compelling strategy to address the long-term dangers. The key players in this conflict might benefit from a pause for reflection before it's too late.